Well, this is the first of several little videos that I'm going to be recording where I'm going to be talking about mentoring. This first video is going to look at what mentoring is, the definition of the word, and how that language has evolved over the last 20 years or so. Future videos are going to look at processes that support mentoring, such as contracts and agreements, tools to facilitate mentoring discussions, a little bit on knowledge transfer. So how do you take ideas from your mind as the mentor and put them into the mind of the mentee in an engaging way? And we're also going to look at the benefits. Why do it in the first place? What are the benefits of mentoring? And actually, having really gone through the literature on this and having engaged in mentoring initiatives over 20 years or so, I think there are many. So let's begin. So the backstory, where did it all begin? So the image, I suppose, is a little bit contested, and this is a myth, I suppose, and so it depends on who you talk to about whether you go along with this. But so there are differing views on this. It's a little bit contested, as lots of things about mentoring are. But anyway, this is where the term mentor allegedly comes from. So the Iliad. And in Homer's Iliad, Odysseus, one of the key characters, he has to go off to go and fight the Trojan Wars. You know, Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships. He's got to go and get her back after she's been sort of carried off by Paris. So off he goes to fight the Trojan Wars, but he's got to leave behind his lands and his properties and all of his responsibilities to his young son, Telemachus, who is a youth and not quite ready to assume that level of responsibility. Odysseus realizes that this isn't so much an educational gap. It's not that he needs a teacher or a professor. He needs something more holistic. And so he engages his wise old friend, mentor, to come and walk side by side with Telemachus and spend time with him, really developing him into the whole person, you know, somebody who is fit for genuine governance, responsibility, and leadership. So it's a nice little story and serves as quite a good metaphor, really, for the holistic nature of mentoring. It's a bit different to being a teacher. You know, it is very much focused on the development of the whole person rather than just specific pieces of knowledge. A mentor isn't a trainer. There's a little bit more to it than that. So I suppose that's really the value of that story, is it does kind of position what mentoring is all about. Bringing things up to date a little bit, a little bit. There's in the early 90s, David Clutterbuck, who's in that image there, looking a bit stern there, David. Anyway, he wrote a book called Everybody Needs a Mentor, and it's a great book, actually, in terms of, if you like, sort of a very good start point for if you are sort of either a mentor or you're sort of looking at kind of introducing mentoring into an organization. I think it's really stood the test of time. He's very, very good, David Clutterbuck. Anyway, here's a little quote. A mentor is a more experienced individual willing to share knowledge with someone less experienced in a relationship of mutual trust. Again, things change. Not everybody's going to feel comfortable about that, because the sharing of experience with someone less experienced, there is a little bit of embedded hierarchy, you could say, within this. But again, I like it, and I think that there's a lot to go at here. So what is mentoring all about? It's about the sharing of experience. That's the first thing. So there's this passing on of knowledge, wisdom, stories, and experiences to the benefit of somebody who's less experienced. There is this thing about sharing of knowledge that's worth sort of unpicking a bit. There's a skill that goes with that. You know, it's all well and good having tons of skill and knowledge to pass on, but actually having the kind of people skills to pass it over is something a little bit different. So mentoring is a skill set all of itself. The last bit is that relationship of mutual trust. So mutual two-way relationship, and trust is very important to it. There's a vulnerability in mentoring, and that's really something to think about in terms of how we set this up and how we perhaps contract around it. Things like confidentiality and, where do you share the content of the discussion with other people in the organization? All of that is really needs to be carefully thought about so that we do have a relationship of mutual trust. Some thoughts for mentoring in practice. It encompasses many diverse practices. There's very little agreement about what mentoring is and how to do it. I'm going to give some views on this, but I could be wrong and you might think otherwise, and that's totally fine. Good luck to you. But essentially, it is a broad and diverse school of thought that sits around mentoring. It can be formal or informal, and I think actually, I bet just sort of reading that has kind of cast my mind back to people I would say who've been very helpful mentors who haven't necessarily had that job title wouldn't necessarily feel like probably even think of themselves as being mentors, but nonetheless, they were great role models, and observing them and working with them, these more experienced people, definitely were points where things moved on. So there can be a formality to it, but I think that mentoring can happen much more flexibly than that. They can just be, you know, as essentially when you sort of very people in your professional life who you look up to and you think, I can really learn something from you. That's mentoring, isn't it? Could be internal or external. Pros and cons to both. So a mentor could be someone who's more senior in your own organization and has sort of walked your path. They could be external. They could be somebody from different businesses or completely different industries. And there can be benefits there actually, and you know, and actually sometimes when we're setting up formal mentoring projects or relationships, we deliberately match people from different organizations to get a more breadth, diversity of experience. The going consensus is it's generally better if a mentor isn't a line manager. There's lots of reasons for that. And of course, it sort of muddies the water, doesn't it? If the person who's mentoring you is also evaluating your performance and has to do, you know, performance management as well, and might be making judgments. And so can you be vulnerable? Can you talk about what your real challenges are with the person who's also doing your appraisal? What if your line manager is your challenge? Not unusual. A poll of Americans done by Deloitte a few years ago identified for 70% of American workers, their boss was the most stressful part of their day. Would that boss make a great mentor? Possibly not. So often better if not a line manager. A little bit of distance is better. But here's, again, muddying the waters. Line managers and people in sort of supervisory positions are often encouraged to mentor their colleagues. You know, we talk about actually, you know, that when you line manage people, that you should also coach and mentor them. Well, where to go with that? So it's murky, isn't it? That actually in an ideal world, a mentor might not be a line manager, but line managers are taught sort of coaching and mentoring skills to kind of lead people. So again, there's a little bit of a paradox to navigate there. So it's ever evolving, and also includes ideas like reverse mentoring, which actually does seem to under the right conditions work quite well. Reverse mentoring goes back to General Electric and Jack Welch, who identified that the older and bolder people that he had elevated to the board weren't necessarily that savvy with technology and data and computing and that sort of thing. He realized that there's an awful lot to learn from engaging with sort of younger generations in the business who were a little bit more finger on the pulse when it came to using technology, the internet and that type of thing back in the 90s. And so he well, and I could be wrong about this, but I think it was Jack Welch and General Electric who kind of stimulated this idea of reverse mentoring, and it's grown arms and legs, and lots of organizations engage with it. It does require a little bit of humility actually on the part of the more sort of experienced and older person to be, I suppose, mentored by somebody who they might perceive as being a bit more junior or a bit less experienced. But you know, but again, experience takes many different forms, doesn't it? You know, this isn't necessarily about seniority. You know, experience could also be technical knowledge or experience of what it is to be, you know, a millennial or a Gen Z worker in your business. You know, useful stuff to know. Another commonality with mentoring is it's two-way process. So because it's, and again, one thing that I think that underpins mentoring is genuine dialogue. It's genuine conversations about things that matter. And that does mean that genuine dialogue, it means that learning goes both ways. It is a two-way learning process. As I just mentioned a little bit earlier on, it's not just about technical knowledge. In order to be an effective mentor, having good people skills and a bit of an ability to kind of explain things well, to think about, you know, the person that you're mentoring, how do they take on board information well? You know, how do you engage with that person in a learning conversation? And to support that, some training and skill development for mentors is a very good idea. I mean, I would say that as somebody who earns their crust from doing this, but it really does help if mentors have those people and kind of communication skills in place. And beyond that, all of that actually, and again, looking at the literature in terms of what do mentors say, the benefits for them are, you know, loads of benefits in terms of leadership ability, you know, becoming more self-aware through the mentoring relationship, particularly when they get feedback from their mentee. That's dead interesting, actually. Anyway, so that's an important aspect of it as well. Lots of benefits by being, sometimes it can be a bit of a pastoral relationship. You know, many people who do mentoring, whether it's voluntary or professional, often say that actually that act of supporting and growing and developing others is one of the most worthwhile and beneficial things that they do in their professional lives. It's really not unusual to hear that. It's interesting that we have that sort of a bit of a pull, not everybody, but certainly I think a lot of people really do find genuine rewards from developing people, sharing their knowledge and helping others to thrive and be better in their roles and in their lives. So loads of kind of pastoral and well-being benefits associated with being a mentor. So very much a two-way benefit process. Getting started, well, I talk about the obvious. The first thing is that there needs to be a match. We need a mentor and a mentee. So someone who's willing to be a mentor and someone who's up for learning a thing or two and being a mentee. This is an awful expression. Begin with a chemistry check. Well, I suppose it's just making sure that the mentor and the mentee, that there is an alignment, that there's a sort of a mutual respect, and then a willingness to work together on whatever topics or focus or goals the mentee might have. The literature suggests that having an agreement is extremely important. So some sort of probably written, actually, so that you've got something to go back to, agreement or contract in place. What are we here to accomplish? How do we work together well? What practical considerations? How do we have respect for each other's time? All of those sorts of considerations is really worth having in place. And I'm going to be talking about that in my next video, actually. Also, having some sort of tools, frameworks to guide the conversation can be helpful at first. Certainly the initial couple of conversations, having something like a kind of conceptual model, to kind of guide how you work, whether that's something like the time-honored GROW model or something like that, really does help. It does a lot of the lifting and the thinking for you, and it just gives the conversation a structure. So certainly in the early stages of the relationship, a framework is a helpful thing to have. Not my next video, the video after my next one is going to talk about a couple of coaching, mentoring tools to support the conversations. So there we go. That's enough for this session. I'm going to be putting out more videos on my little channel, cool training tips, the subsequent sessions on mentoring. I'm going to be talking about the agreement and how to establish a mentoring agreement, some key considerations of that, and I'll share a model to support it. A mentoring framework, my favorite is probably Clear, but I think GROW's worth talking about well. So some tools which are often perhaps a little bit more associated with coaching, but can be absolutely valid and useful in mentoring relationships, and also tools and techniques for sharing knowledge in interesting ways. That's really what my little channel's all about, actually, is it's for people who want to pass on knowledge to others around them. How do we do that in ways which are engaging, interesting, and fun? Thank you very much for observing this little video. I think I've probably gone on a little bit longer than I'd initially intended, but it's often the way of these things. I hope that there's been something of use there and that you're sufficiently interested to tune in to some of my follow-up videos. Thanks very much. This has been Alex Firmin, and I look forward to doing my next video very soon.